Welcome back to New Rockstars. I'm YouTube's fetid moppet, Erik Voss, and this is a breakdown of Severance Season 2, Episode 2, Goodbye, Mrs. Selvig. This episode is the Outie half of the season premiere, and much more focused on Cobell that says a firm goodbye to her phony pseudonym of Selvig. There is so much to break down in this episode, from a new animated intro sequence to whether all of these pineapples were really all bobbed for. So let's break down this scene by scene for all the details and clues you might have missed. And yes, we go more into this episode over on the Break Room channel, trying to answer all of your questions, so subscribe to the Break Room to continue the conversation there. This episode opens just like the Season 2 premiere did, the same audio clips from the Season 1 finale of each of the 4 innies, final seconds before the overtime contingency was cut off by Milchick tackling Dylan, but this time, rather than only hearing this audio over black, we see these innies on the outside as the black flickers in until we see Outie Mark now from behind with his brother-in-law Rickon on his right and Patton on the left. And Patton is low-key the funniest character on this series, as a smug know-it-all who totally stole Outie Mark's thunder for finding baby Eleanor in the car seat in the Season 1 finale. Before, I talked about the cinematographer Jessica Gagne using this Zolly effect that she called, shifting between different focal lengths in shot to morph the actor's face during the elevator transition. But in this shot of the back of Mark's head, she uses a more traditional dolly zoom that morphs the surroundings, like Hitchcock's shot from Vertigo or Spielberg's shot in Jaws. This better reflects how Outie Mark's shifting world would look from his perspective. Remember, Outie Mark's override took over while he was mid-hug with Cobell/Selvig, so from the Outie Mark's point of view, he would have jumped straight from a hug with Selvig to what was moments ago a shout on the other side of the room, holding his wedding photo with his dead wife. Another fun thing to track is how put off Rickon is to hold or take care of his newborn daughter.
Mark, here, will you take her for a second?
It's okay.
Careful. Don't go far, though.
I won't.
Mark?
Babe.
Okay.
Need help with his diaper. Oh boy.
Babe, will you take her for a second?
Yep.
Devin asks Mark what her name is, and he jokingly responds Persephone, which is kind of like a brother-sister thing. But in Greek mythology, Persephone is the daughter of Demeter, goddess of the harvest. Persephone was kidnapped by Hades and taken into the underworld, where, because she had eaten his pomegranate seeds, she has to spend half her life in the underworld and half on Olympus with the other gods. And obviously there's some parallels here to severed persons and the way that they have to divide their time. But Outie, Helena, and maybe even Gemma, who was last seen descending to an unseen underworld through the red down arrow elevator, are both in a way trapped Persephones in underworlds, with the Hades of that analogy being Lumon, or more specifically the ongoing spirit of Keir Egan. Back at Lumon, in the wide shot you can see a worker rolling up the VIP carpet for the event that night while someone stands watching. In the upper left corner of the building, only the boardroom is illuminated, where Helena stands. Up close we see Helena stroking her neck, likely thinking about the rope burn from Outie Heli's attempt in Season 1, though what Outie Heli has done to her now hurts far more. Mr. Drummond enters, played by Icelandic actor Dari Olafsson, who had a role in Ben Stiller's The Secret Life of Walter Mitty. Pre-season marketing materials describe this character as Lumon's security chief, though I don't know if he's the mystery man in blue who appeared behind Mark in the Season 2 premiere. Drummond is followed by Helena's father, James Egan, the current CEO of Lumon, and he is pissed.
Fetid moppet.
Fetid moppet. What an antiquated way of saying foul child. The rage James conveys here is so terrifying. I thought he was about to hit his daughter, but really I think he's trying to strike all the way down to Helena's innie inside of her. But after Helena says father, notice his reaction. He seems to find himself.
Father?
What changed there? Well, in our last breakdown, I shared the theory that many are speculating that the master plan of Lumon Industries is to resurrect Keir Egan, the founder, and that a piece of Keir's identity could live on in these incomplete, half-baked, but gradually improving generations with each of his descendants. And that's why James referred to his death in the past as the Revolving. Now, James Egan is the 8th CEO of Lumon Industries, following Keir, the founder, then Ambrose, then Myrtle, then Baird, then Gerhardt, then Philip, then Leonora. So James here could be like Keir 8.0, being disgusted with Keir 9.0, and then realizing he is an obsolete generation and backing down. And that could be why Helena, as Keir 9.0, doesn't really seem that intimidated by him, ultimately. As Outie Dylan exits Lumon with an ice bag on his head, the lobby lights shift on Keir Egan's head, maybe another visual example of the revolving, like sun setting on one generation of Keir to make room for a new generation of Keir. Helena orders Milchick to find everyone, and when he asks if he should fire them, she says, "Let Keir guide your hand." And it's it's interesting how he will begin by firing Dylan and Irving, but keeping Mark, I guess, to complete the Cold Harbor file. But ultimately, Kier's hand will require him to keep all three employed, and it must drive Milchick crazy that he isn't as in tune with Kier's plan as maybe true believers like Kobol are. We follow Helena in this interesting wide external tracking shot left across the frame through the glass windows of the Lumon executive suite, which is an interesting contrast to the vertical journey that the innies have to take down the elevator shaft, a transition that occurs behind non-transparent walls. She meets Kobol, who sits at the long end of this conference table, making us wonder, whoa, how many board members are there at Lumon to ever require a conference table this long? When Helena, Kobol, and Drummond sit, notice that the camera positions the three of them all sitting facing different 90-degree angles, which is the same orientation as people who would sit at the MDR cubicles. Kobol even asks if her father, James Egan, would be joining, implying that even Hermione felt that this trio needed like a fourth to complete the divine set in the seating arrangement. Helena appears to fall on her sword for firing Kobol, apologizing for herself, for James, and for the board, but really it's to control Kobol with this phony promotion to a new Severance Advisory Council, really to keep her away from the severed floor. Kobol speculates it's because they fear her, but
We fear no one.
a truly evil sentiment that probably is spoken in private by a lot of CEOs in our world. And if Kier PE is within a Lumon-governed sovereign principality outside US jurisdiction, surely they would have no one to fear. Milchick's motorcycle goes up to 200 according to its speedometer, and it always blows my mind how fast motorcycles can be. And his plate is LFS 159 Remedium Omnibus, which is the same slogan that we saw on Mark's license plate, and it translates to a cure for all mankind. And yes, that is a picture of Kier Egan. Milchick speeds past this bar, and the marquee reads Dieter's Brother Live No Minimum. Dieter's Brother could be like another band that's part of the lineup or the community that we saw Petey's daughter June playing in season 1. Helena records this cover story video saying that she was just drunk while using non-Lumon medication for an arm rash. Since Lumon is into pharmaceuticals, it would make sense that she would avoid any possible negative PR there. And with the arm rash, I wonder if she's giving like a possible cover story for any kind of reason to cover her arms in the future, like, you know, some cutting that her innie might try. On the computer that records her, as with all the keyboards at Lumon, there is no escape key because there's no escape. Outie Irving says that he was watching The Barber of Seville. That is an opera about a count who fell in love with a rich girl and with the help of a clever barber was able to marry her. It's a story about true love persevering through obstacles, which points to Irving trying to reconnect with Bert. And I kind of wonder if Dylan could be the clever barber of that romantic courtship. The Outies of Irving and Dylan are fired as Helena completes her video recording, promising to atone for her outburst and claiming it was just a drunken joke and a lie. But as Milchick drives away from Dylan's neighborhood, his cul-de-sac has a central island shaped like the Lumon water droplet logo. This video is sponsored by Blue Chew. If you spent New Year's Eve watching the ball drop and thinking, I wish that didn't remind me of my wiener, Blue Chew can lift your spirits and a whole lot more besides. Blue Chew is a unique online service that delivers the same active ingredients as Viagra, Cialis, and Levitra, but in chewable tablets and at a fraction of the cost. Blue Chew's tablets are made in the USA and prepared and shipped direct to your door in a discreet package. It's super easy too. Just sign up at bluechew.com, consult with one of their licensed medical providers, and once you're approved, you'll receive your prescription within days. It's all done online. That means no visits to the doctor's office, no awkward conversations, and no waiting in line at the pharmacy. You can take Blue Chew anytime, day or night. That way you can plan ahead or be ready for whenever an opportunity arises. If you're skeptical or don't think you need it, try it free for a month and see. Make life easier by getting harder and discover your options at bluechew.com. And we got a special deal for our viewers. Try your first month of Blue Chew free. Visit bluechew.com for more details and important safety information. And we thank Blue Chew for sponsoring our channel. So artist Oliver Latta, aka Extra Weg, returns after his amazing opening credits sequence for season 1 with this awesome update for season 2, and we have to break it down. So remember, season 1's credits began with Outie Mark lying in bed and ended with him lying beside his red pajamaed Outie. Now the Outie Mark in red pajamas that are made a bit more orange here to kind of look like a prisoner jumpsuit is alone sitting up on bed and turns to see the elevator door open and a balloon of his own head squeezes out. We saw this literalized in season 2 episode 1 with the blue balloons with Mark's face on them, and those, let's not forget, called back the season 1 credits that showed pajama wearing Outie Mark carrying a balloon bunch made of his own twisted arms. Then we see Mark following this balloon down the stairs into what seems like his own brain. In the watery surface beneath his feet, reflections of 2 women flee if you look closely. There's Helly and then there's Gemma, the 2 trapped Persephones of this story. But now we see he is standing on his own chin, and Mark sees his innie self, and then the sleeping Outie Mark that he's standing on finds himself in a bed surrounded by faceless baby dolls in suits. Could be the faceless members of the board, or Mark's fertility struggles with Gemma that might have actually produced Miss Huang literalized here. But as we'll see at the end of the sequence, it's actually part of the revolving reincarnation process that leads to Keir Egan. We zoom out to show Mark trapped inside his own severance chip implant. The folds of his brain are not gray matter, but green, the color of their macro data refinement office. And since this is a Ben Stiller joint, I am reminded of this line in Meet the Parents.
Well, they say geniuses pick green. But you didn't pick it.
Outie Mark pulls Outie Mark out of the skin from his own head, freeing him. It looks like this head might be robotic because there are red and blue wires coming out of it. And then Outie Mark falls down into Irving's mug, the handle of which has 2 loops like brass knuckles. Outie Mark spilled out of a different mug with a bunch of Outie Marks in the season 1 intro. Mark stands at his desk facing a blurry mirror wall, but his reflection is a faceless white surface. Could it be symbolizing Mark's loss of identity in this process? And then, as in the season 1 intro, Mark jumps down into a bottom half of his own head that's kind of like a workspace, but now that immediately transitions into these paint brushstrokes to become a painting of a goat, and recalling the baby goat room on the severed floor that we still only have questions about. Then we see Mark is on an iceberg of a frozen lake, and he bumps into Outie Mark, inflating his head into a balloon as others around them follow suit. And you'll see in the background there is a crashed car submerging into the ice, and we have to assume that this was Gemma's crash. It was said that she hit a tree before, but maybe after hitting that tree, the car careened into a lake. Mark floats up away from this ice through tree roots back up into his own head, inflating it briefly and knocking over these bottles that I thought might be Eleanor's baby formula, but could be paste to try to reassemble the shredded photo of Gemma. Outie Mark then lifts up a curtain wall to bring Mark through it. The arrow button is pointed down here, but when they come through the other side, it is facing up. And now spring plants poke through the snow, and there's a grassy field similar to the patch where those baby goats are being fed, where headless Marks and balloon heads of Helly and Gemma lie about. All of this we see is in a book being read by Miss Cobell, whose face has become a giant searchlight. And then Mark runs down the hallway where we last saw Gemma Miss Casey being led down the hallway that Outie Irving keeps painting, depicting what I call the Hellevator. And we rush toward that Hellevator, and the person inside flashes back and forth between Gemma and Helly R. And I think this intro's interchangeability between the two is meant to reflect Mark's divided feelings toward both Persephones, his old love lost and the new love found in this underworld. And we return to Mark on his bed, and crawling at his feet is a baby Keir Egan, another clue of Lumon's master plan, and specifically Mark's task of the Cold Harbor file. All of it designed to resurrect Keir Egan in a final revolving. Baby Keir even creepily turns his head toward Mark, causing snow to clump on the ground. It's just true horror gesture. And in another horror homage, we end with the back of Mark's head, like the shot of Outie Mark that we saw before in this episode, now fingers boring out of it, like the iconic shot in The Grudge. I think that eye belongs to Helly or Helena, showing how this battle between the Persephones of which woman actually occupies Mark's mind, the new girl is the one who wins. Or really, we should say Keir 9.0 wins. Overall, when you compare the credits of this season to the credits of last season, the Outie Mark and Outie Mark now seem to be working more closely together. Whereas in season 1, it seemed like Outie Mark was more depressed and passive, while Outie Mark was more active in staging a revolt. So Rebecca tells Rickon,
Don't punish the baby, Rickon. This wasn't its fault.
Its fault? Also, why would anyone think a dad would punish a baby for like a book reading event going awry? Remember, Rebecca, whom Rickon told Mark that he had to buddy up with at the reading event, she told Mark that she had a scar on her neck from where a bird pecked her, but it could also be where a severance chip was implanted. Just gotta keep our eye on Rebecca. Milchick revives. Rickon compliments his magnificent motorcycle helmet, and throughout the scene, the helmet reflects the overhead lamps in a specific way to make them look like a set of eyes staring downward. Milchick's explanation is that the override is in Mark's start paperwork and blames everything on Harmony Cobell just being unwell.
She will never descend to that floor again, nor bedevil you out here any further.
Descend, bedevil. That's some hellish lexicon there. As with Lost, the writers of the show clearly want us thinking of Lumon's underworld as a possible depiction of hell, and nicknaming Helena as Helly is likely an extension of that. There are some very cool languid cross dissolves in this part of the episode that create some cool superimpositions. Like first here, Milchick leaves the kitchen, and the dark part of the living room on the right side of the frame now becomes Irving's painting of the Hellevator. And then in the shot of Irving, it cross dissolves with Milchick on his motorcycle in the superimposition, making it look look like Milchick is slicing across Irving's throat. I just point these out because Stanley Kubrick loved to use these long, slow superimpositions in The Shining that just created some really unsettling images. Helena watches back the footage of any Heli R's goodbye to Mark back in season 1, episode 8, followed by their kiss. But it seems like in her stirs something that she has never gotten in her Outie life. Meanwhile, Young Man's Blues by Mose Allison plays over Outie Dylan's hunt for a new job. The lyrics we hear are, "Oh, well, young man, ain't nothing in this world these days, but nowadays the old man got all the money." Another clue that Lumon is really a form of a gerontocracy, where the lives of young people are being expended to preserve the memory and traditions of the old. Dylan interviews at a place called Great Doors, which is such a hilariously basic company name, or even a concept of a business to really exist, unless it's just a basic commodity allowed by this Lumon nation, because they don't want to also produce doors for everybody, because the way they make doors is just like a very advanced IP that they don't want to share with the broader public. Actually, this shot of Dylan's van rolling up really shows a variety of time periods in the cars on this show. We see models from the early 90s, the early 70s, and I think that's an SUV from the aughts. Dylan interviews with Mr. Saliba, who looks like an older version of himself. Adrian Martinez is another actor who appeared in The Secret Life of Walter Mitty. Behind them, the doors glide on tracks, reminding us of Monsters, Inc., which is of course another famous workplace conspiracy story.
None of this ever happened, gentlemen.
The humorless Mr. Saliba says Lumon makes their doors in-house, which he calls hubris, but naturally Lumon takes security pretty seriously and doesn't trust any outside contractor to install their doors. Mark meets Devin in Pip's Bar and Grill, which is the same diner slash bar slash restaurant where Mark met Petey in season 1. It was named after Philip Egan, one of the past CEOs. On the wall by the door, I'm pretty sure that's a portrait of Pip Egan. Mark reminds Devin that he identified Gemma's corpse and later implies that Gemma's body was cremated. So if the theories are right that Cold Harbor is a Lumon experiment to resurrect a dead body and give it a restored soul, and that they're running a trial with Gemma's corpse using her husband's any soul to spark, perhaps part of this cover-up was just keeping the remains while handing Mark just an urn of random ashes. We see Mr. Drummond has been in a background booth for this conversation, like Walter White, and we see he has a frolic tattoo on his hand, referring to one of the 4 tempers, those being woe, frolic, dead, and malice. I actually wonder if Mr. Grainer could have had another one of the 4 tattooed on his hand, and that would make a total of 4 security heads representing the 4 horsemen. I'm probably stretching there. Outside in the parking lot, there's a green Jeep Cherokee on the far right of frame that looks like the same Jeep that passed Dylan outside Great Doors, and I wonder if Drummond had been following Dylan as well. Mark keeps beta fish in his house in a tank, and we see this orange one facing his reflection. In the wider shot, we see that there are actually 2 fish divided by a central barrier. Just the fact that the first fish we see is orange reminds us of Outie Mark's red-orange pajamas in the opening credits, but this is actually super significant because beta fish will kill each other if they are grouped together, so you have to keep them divided. And yeah, there's all kinds of parallels here with Outie Mark versus any Mark, and I just like that both versions of these fish are still, at the end of the day, trapped in a tank. Irving's apartment complex is named Leonora Lake, named after Leonora Egan, the 7th CEO of Lumon, who ruled the company from just 1999 to 2003 and died at the age of 48, younger than any other CEO, including Keir Egan, which seems pretty suspect. Jane Egan was her immediate successor. Milchick visits Mark at his house with a pineapple in the gift basket. Of course, the animated video in episode 1 of the season promised innies would now be able to bob for pineapples. Milchick reminds Mark that when they first started working at Lumon, he said that since Gemma died, every day felt like a year, and that he felt like he was choking on her ghost. And choking on her ghost is such an interesting phrase, because cruelly, Mark's inability to get over Gemma, I think, is what attracted Lumon to use him to process the Cold Harbor file. Like they needed some lingering part of his soul who was haunted by this grief to guide his fears to batch the numbers to reform part of her soul. And of course, his grief causing time dilation would make him an apt suit for the condensing of time that Severance causes. Mark sits in his parked car in the Lumon parking lot, which is also where we first saw him in the very first episode of the series, sobbing before he walked into work. Helena, Milchick, Drummond, and Natalie, the board liaison, discuss their plan to reintegrate Mark, saying they have a floater from overseas, that's referring to the Italian Dario Rossi, and they say 2 layoffs from Branch 5X, that's referring to Gwendolyn and Mark W., which Drummond asks about skeptically, suggesting that things must have really been a mess there. Later, when Mark W. or Mark Wilson is fired, he says that he broke a lease in Grand Rapids. So from that, I'm assuming 5X might have been in the Grand Rapids, Michigan area. Though we should note that we did not see a Michigan location on the Lumon globe map in that animated video. So those locations are not accurate to where Lumon's principalities actually are. Above Judd's desk, the clock reads 9:04, which aligns with the 9:05 on the analog clock and the severed floor back in the season 2 premiere. And when Mark leaves, Judd's clock now reads 5:12. The next day, it's 1 minute earlier to the start start of the day, 9:03, and when Mark goes down, he fades into black before coming back up, because this would be after Outie Mark grabbed the board intercom and Milchick threatened to end his inner life. Now we see the perspective of Milchick and Drummond and Helena listening to that recording. Drummond reports that the board is going to give Mark what he wants, including Heli R, and Helena looks pretty reluctant as she has to go along with it, showing that she's subservient to whatever the board wishes. And from that, I'm wondering, is the board as we know it, the reason they don't talk is they are comprised of like disembodied, digitally stored souls of the 7 past deceased CEOs of Lumon, and that collectively they form what we now know to be the remains of Keir Egan's soul? Like, Helena clearly doesn't fear her father, Jane Egan, but maybe only because he's still walking around alive, and that the only thing she would fear, especially after saying,
"We fear no one,"
might be the 7 Egan ancestors that preceded Jane. Milchick rehires Irving and Dylan, giving them both pineapples, but with Dylan an even bigger gift basket, maybe because Dylan has a family that also needs to be won over here. And then like the long take shot that welcomed Mark and then Dylan and then Irving and then Helena on the severed floor back in the season 2 premiere, we now see the Outie half of that long take, and it's still a long take here. We see the Outies of Mark and then Dylan and then Irving and then Helena going to their lockers, getting waved down by Judd, and then going into the elevator. But we do have to note that we do not follow Helena into the elevator, and we don't see the camera Zolly on her face inside that elevator. So we still don't know for sure if our theory that we presented in our breakdown of episode 1 that Helena had her severed chip disabled so that she could pretend to be Heli R on the severed floor. We don't know if that's true or not. Many of you countered my speculation saying that Heli R down there might just still be her innie, and that her deceptive actions and behavior were more out of shame for who she found out her Outie actually is. I don't know. I just think it's more interesting if Helena Egan wants to ultimately meet Outie Mark herself. And when she seemed pretty reluctant to go down to the severed floor in the scene earlier, the only way that she can make peace with that is by hijacking her own severed chip. Like, she's powerful enough at the company to where I feel like she could do that. And Mark finally runs into Selvig / Cobell.
Who are you?
Again, we come back to Mark's very first spoken line of the series.
Who are you?
Cobell seems to be leaving Baird Creek, but she doesn't want to give Mark answers.
Do you know something about Gemma?
Cobell pauses and then... Whoa, so is Cobell harboring guilt for some role she might have played in Gemma's car crash? Is her reaction here in the driver's seat a way that she might have died before her body was resurrected by Keir at an earlier time? This kind of unhinged reaction from Harmony Cobell is fascinating, and I feel like we're gonna learn a lot more about it in the episodes ahead. Comment down below with your thoughts on this show. And again, continue this conversation with us over on the Break Room channel. Subscribe to all 3 channels in the New Rockstars Network for breakdowns and news coverage of everything you love. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time, you fetid Muppets!